Thank you for joining. Again, this is David Politis, the founder and CEO of BetterCloud, and you're joining us today for our webinar, The Rise of SaaSOps and What It Means for IT. Now, I'm going to take you through a couple of housekeeping items here. Number one, if you'd like to ask questions throughout this webinar, you can do that in the GoToWebinar app. So in the top right corner of your screen, there's a questions portion of that app. You can go ahead and ask questions there. And as we start getting towards the end, I'll take those questions and share them with the panelists. This session is going to be recorded, and afterwards we will send it out to everyone who registered and attended. So in case you want to share this with your colleagues, you will have a recording of this. We usually get that question at the end of the webinar of whether or not we'll have a recording. We will. And there's also a webinars channel in BetterIT. If you have not seen BetterIT, you can join BetterIT, betterit.cloud. It is a Slack community where we have about 3,000 IT professionals who share best practices. They may be speaking about the webinar as it's going on, so feel free to join BetterIT. It really takes about 2 minutes to join, and you can join the webinars channel there if you'd like to join the conversation. So with that, we're here today to talk about SaaSOps, and I have two panelists with me. Before I have them introduce themselves, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about what is SaaSOps. So the definition of SaaSOps is a practice referring to how software as a service applications are managed and secured through centralized and automated operations, resulting in reduced friction, improved collaboration, and better employee experience. So again, at a high level, it is how we're managing and securing our SaaS applications in the digital workplace. Now, within SaaSOps, there are 15 disciplines. There are three main discipline areas and three main practice areas and 15 disciplines. And these range from people and process. So everything from what does your team structure have to look like? What are the skills that your team needs to have? All the way to SaaS management. How do you onboard and offboard users across dozens, if not hundreds of SaaS applications? To least privilege access. How do you make sure that the right people have access to the right applications at the right time? And all the way down into insider threats, file security. How do you handle the security of these disparate SaaS applications that have given a lot more control to our users? So we're going to be talking a little bit about this and some other subjects with our panelists today. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'll actually have them introduce themselves very quickly. So with that, Mitch and Chad, thank you for joining. We'll start with you, Mitch. If you can just give a quick introduction to yourself, your background, where you are today, and then we'll jump right into it.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody for your time today too. Feel free to ask lots of questions, in the panel there. So I'm Mitch Greenwald. I'm the CEO and founder of Cloudbakers. Cloudbakers is a premier Google partner, and we focus on mid-market companies and really help them, get to the cloud. So we bring the cloud down to earth. I started the company about 9.5 years ago. I was a CIO for a $400 million company here in Chicago, and looking to get some help on going to the cloud. My own staff thought I was pretty crazy for what we were looking at, and I looked at a few different technologies, G Suite being one of them, and I couldn't get my staff engaged really, and I was working with Google, and I was looking for partners and found a partner in New Jersey and one in actually Halifax, Nova Scotia, and thought that the cloud was going to be a thing. So I like to say that I jumped off a cliff, landed on a cloud, and formed Cloudbakers without a single client, just the idea to help people move to the cloud. If you fast forward 9.5 years, we have over 600 clients in 44 different states. We're one of Google's top partners. We do a lot with SaaS application deployment. We also do a lot with Google Cloud Platform and data application development, as well as infrastructure. And we also work with CRM too. So thank you for having me, and I'll turn it over to Chad.
Great, thanks, Mitch. Chad?
Thanks, Mitch. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, my career started in the mid-90s, and most of the time I've been spending in the IT world has been around managed service providers, whether it be in web hosting, data centers, hybrid on-prem, in the cloud solutions, and more recently working with a well-known private wealth management firm that highly embraced cloud technology, infrastructure as a service. And so I've been working there for a few years. More recently, an acquisition that by a well-known Fortune 100 financial firm. And again, continuing on with that legacy that Dave and Mitch are referring to, having to do more with less resources and trying to support, at this point, 90 plus regional offices and a couple headquarters offices in addition to the other acquisition work. So obviously trying to get a lot done with very few resources.
Great. Well, thank you, Mitch and Chad, for joining us. And I think when we talk about SaaSOps and we talk about this practice and really more of a movement more broadly, I wanted to just get from both of you, since you have a lot of experience in this space and you've seen IT change, workplace technology change over time. What do you think over the last, call it 15, maybe 20 years, 10 years, what do you think the biggest changes you've seen in workplace technology? What have they been, maybe top 2, 3 changes that you've seen in workplace technology over the last 10 to 20 years? Maybe we'll start with you, Chad.
I think what I've noticed mostly is even over longer periods of time beyond that, there's been this constant centralized, decentralized type movement around your data or your applications or the processing power. And so it seems like for lack of a better reason, a lot of times it was because of some advancement that took place in technology, usually around the speed of the transmission, whether it be the internet or whatever that's come along. And more recently, over the past 15, 20 years, the thing that's really brought things forward has been that virtualization. VMware, Hyper-V, whatever it is that you were using at the time, brought things a lot more into that virtual space, but there was still a lot of waste every 4 to 6 years, throwing away all that hardware and all that time spent. And let's do a tech refresh, start over again. And so I think what we've seen more with the SaaS world today and this infrastructure as a service, you name it as a service, those movements have been around reducing that waste. And I think it's very organic in the way that this is really moving. And I think that's well put to say that SaaS Ops is really a movement that this is like perfect time, tipping point kind of situation.
Okay.
Great. Mitch?
So I think there's there's obviously a ton of changes that have happened, but as opposed to a few monolithic applications out there, there's a great variety of best of breed solutions that are out there now too. And those best of breed solutions, can be stitched together in a pretty unique way to support like the special sauce of your business, if you will. And so there's a lot of flexibility out there also. So I think things have gone more from a keeping the lights on scenario, like 80–90% of your time is keeping the lights on, and more of a business focus on how does technology add value to the business instead of being an isolated piece out there. And you could use the same analogy that was out there in the early 19th century or early 20th century when people went from running their own power plants to using a centralized power plant, which if you've read the book The Big Switch, it's a great write-up on that whole paradigm shift. And so going to these best of breed apps is really good. And one of the nice things about them, these are all usually SaaS apps, and then you can stitch them together in a certain way to add that special sauce that these monolithic apps used to be out there. So I think the shift from these large apps to a series of very small apps that could help out is really, really key. And then of course the SaaS ops piece really helps you maintain that instead of having to do permissions and workflows and how do you onboard people and offboard people, find security holes. Using something like SaaSOps could really, really help with that quite a bit. And it's very one of the interesting little secrets about SaaS in particular is it's one thing to move from on-premise to a SaaS app, but the interesting part is moving from one SaaS app to another is actually much easier than that initial paradigm shift. So once you get up there, getting a tool to manage those SaaS apps in an easy way is very, very important. And that's really
it's interesting because actually, what you're talking about, Chad, and the centralized versus decentralized approach and what's possible technologically is ultimately what really drove what Mitch talked about, right? So I think the technology has allowed us to move to this best of breed world where you couldn't really do that 20 years ago. Just the cost. I'm now speaking from starting a software company. The cost to start a software company, what you had to do to deliver to the enterprise 20 years ago, you just could not. They could not have best of breed because there weren't enough companies that could actually be started to serve the needs of IT in these organizations today. The way it works, I mean, you can build a technology company, software company pretty quickly, and I think that's what enables us to have this best of breed world that you're talking about, Mitch. Which, so as you look at the organization,
David, if I could add on to that just a little bit, what's also really interesting that's never been the case before. You talk about startups, is that technology has been the great the playing field has been leveled as far as technology. What was only available to Fortune 100 and 500 companies now is available to everybody through the power of SaaS on a subscription basis. So the cost of startup is so much less than it used to be. Sorry. So
no. That's so I was going to ask you, Chad, in your experience, I mean, Mitch and I are not practitioners anymore. At least I've never been, and Mitch is no longer. From your perspective, in your organization now, or even in the past, what do you see the impact of these technologies being? You know, when you look at your workforce or your 90-something locations, you know, how do you see this technology actually impacting your organization? And let's start with your users, really, which is what ultimately matters.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that seem to really drive any shift right now as to the heavy burden on the IT organization, and part of it is, like you said, the users. So they're Googling as fast as we are, as far as how do I find an app that does, and then fill in the blank. And so initially it was, hey, let's give them all Microsoft Office, or let's give them all Google G Suite, and they're going to be happy. And then let's add some plugins, and then so it just goes on and on and on. So part of this is how do you continue to add and allow for that flexibility, that frictionless experience for your users, because they're going to push back. That's going to just create more work for you, or more conversations that have to be had about, well, what about this, and how do I add this piece of software? So fortunately and unfortunately, it's very, very accessible. And the other piece that's driving this, I think that for a long time, the legislation around IT was trying to catch up. And now I think there's a number of governance and regulation sides of things that are catching up and getting a little beyond now what we can even keep up with. So if we were to try to impact the old world and add these levels of complexity around GDPR, ISO certifications, NIST certifications, CCPA, all these things we probably couldn't even keep up with trying to do that on our old infrastructure. With the new, there's ways to do it, but now you have to attach it to everywhere that you're touching data, everywhere that you potentially have that PII or sensitive information that you're trying to protect for your customers or even for your own employees. So I think that it's that trying to keep up with that is really where I see my team, the resources really being put to the test.
Mitch, from your perspective, you said 600 plus clients, and when you look at those clients and you look at the work that you're doing, because obviously in most cases I would assume you're engaged with the IT organization with inside of those clients. When you look at that, what are the impacts? What are maybe the success stories that you're seeing, again, as it relates to the end user? What are you seeing in those orgs?
Well, there's there's three things that lead to project success almost always, and one is executive sponsorship, IT leadership, and then change management programs. Having a successful change management program, really, really, really important. And so the people that have all three of those are almost always successful rolling out these types of apps. The change management program, quite often the change management program piece, it's really important to know that putting in an application, putting in an application is one thing. getting people to adopt it is a whole nother thing, and getting people to really use it and be passionate about it is a whole different story, actually. And there's ways to get there through really concerted efforts and change management, which is more of the human side of things, really. But you got to have an application that works and that fits their needs. But it's really important to have that type of program in place to get them to be successful. The
change management. Sorry to chime in on that, because that's something that I've seen a lot. I'll be honest, even here at BetterCloud, where we have obviously very forward technology. The people we have here, they understand how to use technology. We as an organization drive a lot of technology into the org. And even here, the speed at which the applications that we're using are changing is kind of crazy. I mean, you're looking at applications that instead of being updated every 3 years, i.e. Exchange, and being updated 2007, 2010, you're not upgrading your own Exchange server every 3 years. Maybe you're doing it every 6 or 7. Now you have no choice. You're getting a new application essentially, or a new feature every day. I mean, whether it's G Suite, Slack, Office 365, Box, Dropbox, Salesforce. I mean, people are putting releases out at a pace that, the change management, I would actually argue, is one of the biggest challenges to true adoption of these platforms.
Yeah, I see that with the DevOps side of things. There's a book, Project Phoenix, that's really interesting. And by the end of that, you come to the conclusion of that you need to be constantly deploying. So how do you do that release management? And I know that you all release probably one or two times a week based on your schedule. So that's an interesting concept to see that we've moved from even the project management principles. So we're not doing waterfall project management anymore. Now we're moved to this agile concept. So I think that it's not really a concept anymore, more of a practice, but I think that's really interesting to see that that's actually possible. We're not getting an update a year or rolling out a new piece of software every 4 years, that kind of thing. You're seeing huge changes every few days.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah. So anyway, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's, to your point, Mitch, of where people are successful. I think a lot of it has to do with the people. That's how, I mean, of course, a lot has to do with the technology, but a lot has to do with the people.
And the people side is quite often a fear of change. They're a fear of losing something. So you just have to show them how to do their jobs within the new environment. And it's so much fun to see I always say I'm a recovering Outlookaholic, and I use G Suite pretty heavily, but it's so much fun to see somebody that is so resistant to moving to G Suite, and then in 2 or 3 weeks they go, I can never live without this. It's one of the more rewarding pieces of the job, actually.
When you look, Chad, maybe, when you look at the technologies again in the environment, your existing environment, another environment that you've been a part of recently, what do you think the SaaS application that you've brought in that has made the biggest impact to the users or even to the IT org? Like, what do you think is that piece of software or a couple pieces of software that, for the people who are listening, who are designing? I mean, I saw some of the names of people joining us today, and some of these organizations are just in the beginning of their journey. And so when you look at the technologies you've brought in, what would you think is the most valuable, most impactful, however you want to define that?
Well, I think just from a protection standpoint, I think it's really important to get a very strong multi-factor authentication principle in place. And so your single sign-on provider is very important. For us, that's been, we've actually moved around. When I first joined the organization, we had a different one, but we moved to Okta, and we found that it's very centric to a lot of the workplace SaaS apps. Including Duo security into that model for mobile device management. That's been really important. The company, way before I even started here, all the way back to 2006, has been working with SaaS apps. So Salesforce has been a big part of things from around 2006. And then later on in 2009 or 10, I think the company brought in G Suite. Basically we implemented BetterCloud in around 2012. However, I don't think we had a good understanding of what all it could do. And we were really just doing the DLP side of things. It was more recent that I've seen a huge improvement in the workflow management around the onboarding and offboarding processes, and those workflows are just a huge part of making everybody's lives better. From the standpoint of getting new users rolled out. It used to take at least 2 hours to create a new user for something that you can have a couple clicks and then you've got your, all the steps done in 5 to 10 minutes. So, or even less than that. So it's pretty incredible to see something like that, and it's so easy to use. I don't have to go find DevOps people to build it, or let's create a new workflow, etc. It's all right there and continuing to expand. So I think that's my stack as far as the ones that really I would call core pieces.
That's great. And Mitch, for you, what do you think in terms of the technologies your organization brings into companies? What do you think the ones that are the most impactful or most important to put in place are?
Well, I really think the real-time collaboration is probably the one that really adds the most value. And G Suite, we've seen just so many benefits to that. And the email and the calendar and contacts, that's just getting, those are table stakes, I guess. But it's the collaboration using Google Drive and Hangouts Meet that really just adds the collaboration to a whole different level. And the files, being always available to you, being in the cloud, not having to know, using search to find them, and being able to collaborate in real time have been huge. But we also see, all companies are really interested in revenue, right? And driving sales. And CRM, most companies are in CRM, but are not using CRM now. But the customer relationship management system, when it's properly configured, that's easy to use, that can get the salesperson productivity up, can get the team selling for the sales manager, and that executives could, forecast revenue so they can understand the hiring trends and their resource needs. Has really been a game changer. And going from a poorly configured CRM to a properly configured CRM to support your business is a really nice thing. And the third thing that we're seeing more of, but it's just really starting, is the data analytics tools that are out there, whether it's Snowflake or Tableau or Looker, and the way to configure these dashboards and get that going. And there's a lot of, I know, Dave, you've heard my pancake analogy, that the first pancake's always for the cats, right? It's the second and third and fourth pancake that you want to eat. So you want to work with somebody that's actually gone through that process a number of times to get your dashboards right, to get the real-time data right. But these tools are going to be very, very critical moving forward. And data is such a huge enabler now, but it's the insights that you get from data is really the new goal of modern what's happening right now. Getting those insights is really going to be key. And
yeah, I think what you're talking about, and in both cases, really, to me, as I'm listening to this, is really around the configuration, right? There's a lot of these applications. It's really how you're using the applications that makes a difference. You can have BetterCloud in place, just for example, and it can do a lot of things, but if it's not being configured correctly, it's not that useful. I would argue the same thing goes, to CRM. I've seen some crazy CRM applications that are not doing anything of use, and people are like, well, I have a CRM in place, and if it's not configured correctly, and by the way, if all these things are not configured and the data is not flowing between them, well, then that's really one of the biggest challenges, And I think we were talking before we started the webinar, which is an interesting subject around, if you look historically, what has always been true in IT, do more with less. I think that's kind of that Chad said that, I think that's true, right? It's just always do more with less. And so I guess the question is, how do you do more with less? I mean, as there are more applications and there are more complexity to those applications, and how do you actually do more with less? I mean, how do you achieve that, Chad? Because I think that's everyone's pretty much, that's what everyone's being told. How do you achieve that?
Well, I think what's kind of cool about it is, back in the day, everybody was a little afraid of what you might have heard around AI or artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that. When it was first discussed, it was sort of like this sci-fi, Cyberdyne, Terminator kind of story that people would hear, or that it's going to replace people's jobs. And I think that, humans should do what they do best, which is make strategic decisions and look at all the inputs that are going on around them. What's in the news today? What's in the weather? What did you see on the way to work? How are people feeling? What are you hearing through your ears? And so those repeatable, boring tasks that are prone to quote unquote human error, I think that's where you find the AI technology really is where things should be. And then those other inputs that are globally available that can be brought into your CRM that you can't hear with your ears, those are the things that needs to bring to the forefront with those dashboards that Mitch was talking about, so that you can manage your whole business around that. So I think that for me, that's where I see the ease of use is going to come from, and the reduction in the number of people that are doing boring jobs. At the same time, there's a ton of governance related jobs, compliance, technology risk, technical risk, all these kinds of other positions that are opening up. So, I mean, no matter what, you're always going to have to find, positions for people. They're not getting replaced. A better term instead of AI, from what I've heard more recently, is human enhancement. So that's what I think that all these tools do, right? Is they enhance the experience for all of us, as well as make it where we can do what we did before, but we can do it a little bit better. And so, that's where I feel.
I like that. Mitch, what do you think?
So this might be just a traditional answer, but I think focus is really important on doing more or less, knowing what you do, what your business is about, and knowing what you don't do. And for the things that you don't do, get tools to help you with that. No one wants to build their own email server anymore, right? Or their own file system anymore. And being able to focus on knowing what you do and communicating that message to your team so you're all rowing in the same direction is really, really key. But what's really interesting about that focus and that communication, that if you really want to scale up and do more with less, you have to define the process that you want to follow there. And those processes, and I'm a total anti-bureaucracy guy, but I understand the value of process as you scale. And process lets you do things repeatedly that you can then, that you don't have to think about. So you can think about the things, the problems that that your customers are having and that you're having internally too. So you can focus on the really good things. So, and that process is something actually that SaaSOps lets you help with it, defining those processes, which I think is very, very, very key. But I think focus and communication are standard business, blocking and tackling, and then be able to do the process and enable those processes so we can focus on the important things are really, really key.
Yeah, I think what both of you said there that I like is how do you make time to focus on the important things, essentially, whether it's the focus and process, whether it's AI or human enhancement or automation, how do you actually go and make time to focus on the important things? I mean, that for me is in my engagement, we have about 2,000 customers. I've spent time with hundreds of them. And when I spend time and looking at the work that's being done, a lot of times when we first bring on a customer, we look at their processes and the amount of work that's being done by people on the team. Chad, to your point, taking 2 hours, 3 hours. I mean, we've seen things 4 or 5 hours to onboard someone or offboard someone, just as an example. It's so routine. I mean, literally, it's just a checklist. You just click down the buttons. That can be done by a machine. And coming up with what the offboarding or onboarding process is to make sure that a person is enabled really quickly and really effectively, that has to be a human being doing that work. And I think that's where what I've heard over and over, and what I believe is kind of what we're trending towards is IT doing a lot less of the actual button pushing and all of that, and a lot more of the strategic work, as well as the change management, being in front of users, all of that. So yeah, I guess next question, I would say, if we go back now, we talk about what has changed. Chad, if you look at the people who are successful in your org, on your team, your peers at other organizations that are successful, what skill do you think today as an IT leader, or someone who wants to be an IT leader like yourself, what skills are most important to learn and develop? Because I think those skills probably have also changed over time, what would you say, the 1, 2, 3 skills that are the most valuable or the most important to a leader, IT leader today?
I think that it used to be that pretty much we were all looking to be, we'd look at that guy in IT who was making a lot of money, and usually he was a specialist early on, right? So he was a SQL administrator, Microsoft Exchange administrator, et cetera. And as mentioned before, we don't want to build a mail server, right, for our company. So that's changed. We're farming that out where we're no longer worried about CPU, memory, and storage as much as just we want that app running that does what we do. So I think that from the standpoint of skills, just as a broad knowledge, if you're in the IT service management side of things, ITIL Foundation certification still remains to be very important. You mentioned earlier, change management, release management. It identifies repeatable patterns. Where if you cover all of these steps, then you've kind of got it covered to have an IT shop. There's more into the DevOps side of things, so as you're diving off into that, getting yourself up to speed on newer agile principles, some of the ones that are moving very quickly, and for large organizations, how that they handle those kinds of movements. And I think that whether you get a CISSP certification or just have a really good understanding of those foundational points within that, I think that's a huge part of the future of IT is to be very, very involved in the ISO side of things, or the information security department.
Great. Mitch, what do you think in your clients that you work with, and you look at the IT leaders in those organizations, what stands out as a common skill or trait?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned about specialization, because I think people do have to be more multidimensional now. And I think the one piece that a lot of people in the IT field traditionally haven't done is use this right here, use their ears to listen. And being able to listen to your business users about what's out there is really important. And I think I feel that actually the people that are most successful in the IT leadership roles are people that listen to the business, know how to translate from business to technology skills, are open and flexible to new ideas, really, really important, and don't just depend on their staff, but they depend on the whole community around them, whether it's a vendor to provide insight, whether it's a partner like Cloud Bakers to provide insight, whether it's a networking group that they use to professional group to get ideas. But people have to really be open and a little bit more agile, as Chad said earlier, or Dave, maybe you said it, about all the updates coming out, all the time for these applications out there, how to leverage them, how to use them, look at new ways to do things. And I think it's also people are investing their staffs, right? Right now, it's really hard to recruit people. It's hard to retain people. And you want to invest in your staff by having them work on interesting projects that are out there, create a culture that they could thrive in, that they want to be in, and provide, whether it's book learning, classroom learning, or the project type learning. So being able to be more of a leader as far as the directional aspects go, and know what you do well and know what you don't do well, and being able to adapt and listen to what makes most sense for your business. So I think the new IT leaders are much more, the ones that are very successful are much more well-rounded in the business, the technology, as well as the human interaction.
Yeah, I actually think when we talk about do more with less, interestingly, when we talk about that, and that's constantly what IT is being asked to do, I think the way to combat that, one of the ways to combat that, one is automate and the human enhancement, everything we talked about before. I think the other way to do that is do what you just said, Mitch, which is if you truly understand the business, what I've seen is I have seen some IT leaders who are being told do more with less. As soon as they come back and say, hey, I understand the business, this is why I actually need more. And with more, I will be able to enable the business in this way and that way. That's powerful. And so I think understanding the business, every CIO that I've seen whose org has grown over time, that's an area where they've really, they've zeroed in on what matters, and they know how IT can enable what matters to the business. And with that, a lot of times, more budget. Probably not double the budget, but at least a little bit more budget will come with that. So I feel like that's a really that's a really good point. And I think going from being specialist to generalist is also important, because you know, it's tough. I think, I don't know, you know, again, I've not been a practitioner. I'm just learning from all the years and talking to people, but it feels like when you talk about that difference between specialist and generalist, one of the challenges, if you're not running this homogenous environment, you can't really go and get certified in everything Microsoft, and it's just less relevant, because now you may not use Teams, you may be using Slack in addition to Exchange Online, you may be using OneDrive in addition to Box. So just being a pure Microsoft expert may or may not really be as valuable as it was, probably not, as it was 20 years ago when Microsoft was the only application. So that was really what you needed in order to get a job. That's at least what I'm seeing as I speak to people.
Yeah, and the other thing is for people to pivot. I think that in this day and age, it's okay to fail, right? And be able to take that and pivot. And, you know, almost always a failure leads to success or leads to more knowledge, and being able to pivot and understand one technology that you might be able to pivot into your area makes a lot of sense.
I have a trusted colleague of mine that I think that one of the things he said was that if you were so attached to whatever product or solution that you rolled out, then you probably spent too long putting it together, right? So I think that's part of that, right? Is that ability to go, man, I love whatever it is, technology, and then at your next job or even at your current job, them saying, well, you know, the business has changed, we need this other, you know, solution and tool, and being willing to go, okay, I love it, but I got to learn the new one. You know?
I love that. I love that.
Right.
That's good. Well, when we talk about these skills and we talk about kind of this change, you know, you talked a little bit about this, Mitch, but maybe Chad, where can people learn? I mean, in your view, you know, where do your colleagues, your peers, where can they learn these skills? I mean, where can they read about them? Or, you know, you mentioned the ITIL certifications. Like, what would you recommend to people who are listening to this? They're moving up the ranks in IT. Where do they get these skills or grow their career? You know.
Mitch, you want to go first, or you want me?
I'm happy to go. It's as I said, I think people learn in different styles. They learn from books and surfing, you know, going to the internet and different things. They learn from on classroom, and they learn from projects. And I think it's different learning styles. But I'm a huge fan of going. Like, I mean, you just had this altitude conference at BetterCloud that sounded like it was a great learning environment, as well as being getting. You know, there's two parts of that. It's the presentation learning, and it's also talking to, you know, your group of equals out there too, and learning what they're doing too. But I think there's, you know, attending physical events can be a very good thing, or webinars like this. It's really important though when you do that you go to that and then you apply it right away. If you wait a month or if you wait 6 weeks, it gets really stale. So if you get a great idea when you come back from one of these events, you know, a really good leadership quality is to say, take that and run with it right away, right? So it doesn't get stale and you can see what's going on. But I'm personally a big reader, excuse me. Hopefully I'm a big leader too. But I like reading. I learn a lot from reading, but I also really like going to conferences and talking and seeing the different things going on. Google Next was a phenomenal place to learn for me this year.
Chad?
Yeah, I concur that I think that going to the Octane events as well as Altitude, I think those are very helpful. You know, going around, you know, learning from your peers, getting a chance to, you know, if you can find mentors, it's even better. I think, but getting a chance to actually work with the different people that are working on different solutions at Altitude, it was really neat to meet with all the different teams that are working on different projects and different tool sets. Online courses like Udemy are really helpful, really low cost way to learn something. I usually try to promote that with my team, you know, have them, hey, what do you want to sign up for? But you need to sign up for something, you know, in this half a year, and it could be something small, but learn something new. You mentioned a couple other ways of learning that aren't coming to mind right now. But basically, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to get a chance to go to those events. Putting things in place can be tricky depending on how much budget that you have. but I think at least putting the ideas down on paper to say, when we go through budgeting next time, here's what, tools that I think are going to be useful for the company. And you obviously, you put your business card in at these events at different, solutions. If you find something that really sticks with you, and say, yeah, I'd like to have somebody contact me, learn more about this, but I'm not ready. We'll have to talk in 6 months. Reach out to me then, and somebody will reach out to you for sure. Everybody's very hungry to keep that kind of thing moving. So I think that there's a lot to be learned there.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead, Mitch.
One more thing, I've seen a lot of success with people doing career transitions or changes to going to these 9 to 15-week boot camps. People have come out of those with really, they're almost like a trade, learning a trade of the boot camps, whether it's computer security or application development, that they're actually pretty nice. And it's kind of interesting to see people go in there with a business background and they come out with a technology background. And that's a great blend of a person to work on your team now.
Yeah, I think, for me, as I listen to both of you talk there, and also what I've seen people be successful with, I do think that there is an element of learning from each other, especially with all the new technologies that are out there. I think learning from your peers, I'm a big believer in that. I think when you mix that with what you said, Mitch, about taking what you learned and actually going and implementing it. For me, whenever I go to a conference, I try to take just one thing that I'll bring back into the org. And I agree with you, bring it back and try it. It may just be a small technique and maybe a change in process, but I try to do that, at least find one thing. I take hundreds of notes and one of the things come back and try to implement. And I feel like that's this incremental, just a little bit each time, and just keep getting a little bit better. So I see that we have a couple questions coming in. We're going to take questions in a minute. I'm going to ask a couple more questions to the panelists, and then we'll take questions. So if you're listening in and you want to start asking questions in the GoToWebinar app, please go ahead and do that. And I see that there are already a couple. So next question I have is, if you think now past SaaSOps, so for a second now, try to past SaaS applications, SaaSOps, cloud, all of that. What do you think is the next big thing that's going to happen in workplace technology? I mean, and I'm talking about what's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 to 15 years that's starting today. We've heard we heard AI, we heard some other things, but what do you think is that next big trend that you're interested in, that you personally believe is that next big change to the digital workplace, or thing that will impact the digital workplace? Maybe Chad, we could start with you on that.
Yeah, and I think that going back to that human enhancement and artificial intelligence kind of concept, as well as just rolling it in. So right now, I think there's a little bit of a compartmentalization between all of the as a service, components, whether it be infrastructure, software, et cetera, in the IoT world. And your personal and your professional world. And I think that all of those are going to blend more and more over the next few years. I think it's always hard for futurists to see, what's it going to look like in 100 years, right? And we have these huge concepts, but what's it going to look like in these incremental steps? But I think that some of the technology that I really like the looks of is what you see around the SD-WAN or software-defined perimeter side of things. I think that's really interesting and exciting to see, where you don't necessarily worry as much about rules of keeping people in or out. The whole idea is just putting a fence around the user and the resource, and that container. And then when that's no longer used, the session ends, the session's broken. That creates a very secure environment. You're not really worried about even physical firewalls on site. You can open it up. You can actually have your computer directly attached to the internet without a firewall in between, because you actually have that ability to containerize everything. So I think, a combination of, all of those inputs being put together to put together the context of where am I? Am I at home? Am I at work? Am I in my car doing this particular activity? And should I be doing that activity based on my past experiences, or what's in the logs and audits and data that the machine is deciding at that point, oh, no, you really shouldn't be doing this. Why are you in Korea at the same time as you're in the US? That doesn't make any sense. So putting that all together, I think, is going to be key. And part of the next steps are going to be just tying that all together, where there's a bit more of a blend between your work life and your home life, even because we all are getting more and more where we work from home. But you also want to keep both your personal life secure and your personal data secure, as well as your work life.
Great. Mitch, what do you think?
So, boy, there's so many options here, right? But I'd have to say that the machine learning piece of it could be extremely interesting. I listened to a talk a little while ago about a company that was that focused on building out, repairing like gas station pumps, right, and the tanks underneath. And they had a database of all this information that they put together. And what they did is, from the initial call, they could take the actual recording of the call, figure out what manual, made sense to have, who was experts on that manual for those types of issues that they're talking about, what parts you need to do, who's the right technician to deploy. And then they armed basically this technician with all the right parts, with the right manuals, with the right person at the right time. We talk about doing more with less, and they were then able to go on site and be able to handle that call 20% faster, 40% faster, 50% faster with less trips, and be able to get that engagement. So those type of insights into getting data from multiple different sources, not only your manual, your inventory system, your personnel system, and the skills they had, and basically aggregating those together and then learning about what the best cases are, is going to be huge. And the fun part about that is that these type of systems are now, accessible to people at all different levels. They don't have to be a, billion-dollar company to get there. It could be a 10 million or $20 million company, or even less, to get there too. But as I know, Dave, you've heard me say this multiple times, but I also, we quite often overcompensate for technology. You go mainframe, you go to PC, you go to client server, you go to web, you go to internet, you go to cloud, and we always, jump all in. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we always kind of overcompensate a little bit there. And what the great equalizer is basically human, the human ability to infer things, to be able to have the compassion, to have the communication skills, and really get people to adopt and apply these things. So I think the one constant is, and the thing that's going to really highlight, is these people that have excellent communication skills and analytic skills that could take these systems and put those together for people. So I think that's really going to be the key factor.
I like those. I like that one a lot. Yeah, we've talked about that before. I agree with that. I think we're going to go a little bit backwards, in terms of how much technology is at the core of things and how much how people are at the core. So I like that. I kind of, one interesting thing that I observe at home that I feel like is coming into the workplace for me personally, I'm starting to see it, is, my kids who are 5 and 3, they're talking to everything, and they're talking to the Google Home that's in the house, and they're getting information that way. And I feel like that in the workplace, by the time they get into the workplace, they're going to be at a place where they're just going to say, hey, Alexa, Google, whatever it may be, what was sales last week, last month? What was this? What do I, and I feel like there's that voice piece is not really, at least not that I see in the workplace today. And I feel like that's going to happen over time, where the data should be accessible as long as it's configured correctly. You've got, your Tableau or your Snowflake or whatever, you've got the data, it's flowing from all the different systems, and just getting access to that data in a faster way. I feel like that's going to be something that changes how we operate daily.
So in 20 years, your kids will say, hey, BetterCloud, orchestrate a workflow for onboarding for my Salesforce, G Suite, and
that's right.
the system.
That's right. That should be done today, actually. That's a good feature. Maybe next hackathon we'll do that. Okay, let me take some of these questions here. So one of the questions, let me see how I use this questions app. Okay, so one of the questions, this is for you, Chad, is you've talked a lot about automation and how in the future people's role will be making strategic decisions. With that in mind, what do you see as the essential positions on a modern IT org? So really kind of essentially, like, if you look at the modern team, your team, a modern IT org, what are the positions that are really important? Maybe these are new positions, or but the question is essentially, what do you see as the essential positions on a modern IT team?
Yeah, I think that from the standpoint of you definitely need a help desk, right? So for whether that be an actual in-house or outsourced, at the several organizations that I've worked at, to keep things small, that's one of the things that they've done is heavily utilized outsourcing to and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's offshore. It can be onshore. We use a help desk organization by the name of Mod Squad. That's very useful. They're very adaptable. That kind of organization can work with whether it's the software development side or desktop support, what have you. So I think that the number of people that are essential, that are actually employees, that may shrink, and you get more and more where your actual employees in the organization are very strategic. I think that that you'll have to also be fairly experienced though at the same time, so that you know whenever to, for lack of a better word, call BS on something that's not, what you think it should be, right? So that you can tell whenever you're being told the right thing. At the same time, I think you develop and can feel, there's a concept Stephen M. R. Covey talks about, a speed of trust. And I think that that's one of those concepts you come up with very quickly with the organizations that you work with if you're outsourcing. So directly, the folks that are needed are going to definitely be the people that can make those strategic decisions. It's very different depending on what kind of company that you're running. So I'd say, whether it's a company that's lots of locations, you're going to have a lot more need for people that know telephony skills and networking skills. If you're a single office and you're doing a lot more DevOps, then you're obviously going to need to have a lot more operations and understanding around agile project management and the capability there for fast development. And that may also be partially outsourced. And I think there's also going to be required to have some level of security skills. Some organizations, especially when they're small, they may develop that may be part of someone's position, but later on that becomes its own office. In a lot of organizations, they feel like it's a bias if the ISO team is on the same team as IT. So you may find that that fits more under its own area or under a governance area like compliance. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, that's helpful. Another question here. This one maybe for both of you in different ways, but SaaS release management. So this is when we were talking about the continuous releases from the SaaS vendors. SaaS release management is an issue, especially when new features are often, quote unquote, on by default. Do you have any suggestions on how to manage that? Being on top of the releases is a full-time job, and we already have one of those. Smiley face. So for both of you, I mean, Mitch, I don't know if you have, any best practices from Cloud Bakers for your clients. I don't know. This is I think a big challenge. G Suite is just one of the vendors, but they're doing thousands of releases a year. How do you handle that or how do your clients handle that?
So there's a couple of things here that I think that when you go with a SaaS vendor that you're using, I think you have to go with one that has a really world-class release process in place. So I think you start out with the quality, because nothing's worse than getting an automatic push out to your application that breaks things, right? Or stops you from working, or even brings down the system. And we've all seen that with, the largest players out there, but they happen pretty rarely. With the smaller players, they happen more frequently. So you want to make sure that they have a world-class process in place. So that's maybe more of a proactive approach that when you're evaluating them. I think the same thing kind of goes with security too. But one of the things that we've seen is that if you could have it could be an internal website if you want to use Slack, if you want to use some sort of chat system, but talking about the releases that are coming out and being able to ideally aggregate what the releases are and what's the benefit and what's not a benefit, what's the benefit to the company there, so they could actually learn to incorporate those really quickly. But most places don't have a way to throttle those. You could actually be quite often in multiple categories, and I want to be on the early release schedule. I want to make it delayed 2 weeks or whatever. Some companies do things like that, but you do have to have a way to communicate those changes to your community.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want, if you're on that 2 week schedule where you could get the IT people early release to that and everybody else, so they get a couple of weeks to test that out, which sometimes happens, is a great way to go. And then let people know what those, what the new features are.
Chad, what have you done in your organizations?
I think from just a life cycle management, best practices around that, and making sure that as you're doing your releases, or we're not testing things in production, going through full UAT testing and defining what those parameters are before release. Working with organizations like Salesforce, where the types of deployment that you do are slightly restrictive in that you're not breaking the primary product. So whenever they come out with a new version of the foundation or the platform, basically the things that you put in place are not going to be broken. There's always going to be something that you have to go back and kind of fix throughout releases as they come out. But I think the tools where the focus really, I think at this point, is, do you really want to develop software, or do you, focus on what is it you do best? So if your company is actually developing software, that's one thing. But if this is a piece of what you do because you've just decided this is what we want to do, is develop this in-house, that's where I think companies need to take a second look and determine, should they be doing that, or should they be utilizing tools like Salesforce to be able to deploy something. It sounds like it's just a CRM, but it's so much more as you dig into it. Find out that declarative programming that they have, and there are deeper ways if you know more programming you can do with the tool. But I think that's again been a big key, is that, as well as periodically going back and rewriting your taking production and rewriting your sandbox and your testing environment. But yeah, it's always going to be a bit of a challenge. I'd recommend reading Phoenix Project if you want to get some ideas.
Okay, great. Okay, well, we only have a couple minutes left here, so I wanted to say thank you to both of you. I don't know if you have any final words, but this has been awesome. Time has actually flown by here. We're literally at an hour. And thank you everyone for joining us. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to submit them here. And like I said, we will be sending out this recording, and really appreciate Mitch and Chad's time. Any final words from either of you?
I think the other thing that I would put out there is as you're trying to justify whatever positions that you have, again, doing more with less. A lot of this has to do with baselining. So identify, create reports, find what, like you said, what is that measurement that really means the most to the organization, whether it's a customer satisfaction number that you're trying to hit, or whatever is the main vision of the organization. But find that baseline number that makes a difference, and then over time report on how much work your team is doing and saying, okay, we're doing this much more, we need this much more resources. So I think that's going to be key.
It's great.
And I would say don't overanalyze. Right? Paralysis by analysis doesn't play. We're all moving at so fast and pace that you really, I say dive in right away and get going and get moving. And if you fail, that's fine, and move on to the next thing. So I think it's important to have the right amount of analysis, right? But don't. I just heard a podcast the other day, an Adam Grant podcast, and he was saying that he was interviewing a CEO of a tech company and saying that if you have 15 meetings on this topic, you're overthinking it and you're already behind the game. If you have 4 or 5, get moving and get going on it and make a decision. Great.
Well, thank you both very much, and thank you all for attending, and hope to see you on our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.